I want to talk a bit about Ecuador first. So Ecuador is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, with over 1,600 species of birds. Ecuador is fifth in the world behind countries like Colombia, Peru, Brazil, and Indonesia, which are also much larger. So if you take into account the size of Ecuador, which is around the same size as Nevada, it's actually the highest biodiverse country in the world. It's the size of Nevada, and it has more than double the species that US has. So even though it is a small country, it has six main ecoregions. So the first one I would like to talk about is the Choco region over here on the west slope of the Andes. It's one of the wettest regions in the world. And next, there's the Tumbes region. Sorry. There's the Tumbes region down here, which is a dry deciduous forest. And then there's the west slope of the Andes and the east slope of the Andes. So the Andes created a division between the center of the country. And over time, species have evolved on either side. And now there's different subspecies and just entirely new species that live only on exclusive to each side. And then there's the high Andes and the Paramo, which is a unique type of environment only at the tips of these mountain ranges. And then there's the Amazon lowland rainforest, which is this large area over here, which feeds into the Amazon. So our journey begins in Catamayo, a small city in southern Ecuador, with an elevation of around 4,000 feet. It's actually one of the only flat areas in southern Ecuador, so this is the only main airport down there, and it's not near any main cities. So from the moment we landed, I knew I was in a birding country. So Ecuador, it's a lot of people go to Ecuador for birding. They go to Mindo, Quito area for photography. They go to the Galapagos, and now southern Ecuador is receiving more attention because the new species are being found. So this is one of my first hardcore birding trips in South America. So almost every single bird I see here is a new species. So beginning with what I saw the moment we left the airport was this Saffron Finch. It's a pretty common bird found all over Southern America in these lower elevations. Has a distinctive yellow color and a orange crown of the eye. Next, we have a Pacific parallette feeding on some berries. This is an example of one of those species that's exclusive to the west slope of the Andes. Its range begins at the border of Ecuador and creeps all the way up to Colombia and all the way down to Lima. Unfortunately, this parallette is one of the most common species of pet birds, so it has actually been domesticated worldwide. So this is the type of environment we were in. It's kind of like the Tumbes region, but it's not officially the Tumbes. So there's some dry deciduous forests, and you're gonna get some different type of species than you'll see maybe in a higher elevation from here. So this was actually one of our target species, and it was nice that we saw it just a few minutes outside of the airport, the tropical gnatcatcher. Contradictory to its name, doesn't actually feed on gnats and flies, but larger insects like spiders and beetles. It's known as a passerine, which many people consider songbirds, but the actual distinction of passerines comes from the foot orientation. It has 3 claws going forward and 1 going backward. But these birds with this foot orientation have developed vocal cords, which is why many people just consider passerines to be songbirds. And we start getting some more interesting species like the Andean Pygmy Owl. And this one is also exclusive to the west slope of the Andes. If you're wondering why a photo of an owl is out here during the day, pygmy owls are actually one of the only few owls that aren't nocturnal and hunt during the day. And also, they're much smaller than the owls you'd find here in North America. North America, you can get up to 2 feet, but this one is just a little more than 6 inches long. Although I said Ecuador is a small country, it does have a few endemics. And it's a safer place to see these special species that you'd otherwise see in Colombia and Peru, where it's more dangerous to go visit these areas right now because of politics. So this is a Aloha Hummingbird. It's a recognized subspecies of the Amazigh hummingbird. This species is exclusive to a few valleys in southern Ecuador around the major city of Loja. I'll also take this photo to talk about Ecuador's and hummingbirds in Ecuador. There's over 130 species, and in this talk, I'll be showing over 30. So that's a lot of hummingbird photos. But I think that's okay because hummingbirds are amazing in their different types of diversity, colors, sizes, and plumages. And now we have a few more common species like the croaking ground dove. It's like the equivalent of the mourning dove you see here. And next is the long-tailed mockingbird, also like the Southern America version of the mockingbird we see here. So it's nice to see these two in urban settings as you would up here in North America. And now I'll take this moment to mention our guide and driver. So our guide was Pablo Andrade. We decided to go with Pablo because he was one of the few people who had been to see the blue-throated Hillstar, which we wanted to see. So he was the best option for our trip. So we started gaining altitude and leaving the valley, and we first get a taste of the cloud forest. And we're welcomed by one of the most classic rainforest species, cloud forest species, the Ant-Pitta. So this is a chestnut crown Ant-Pitta. Birding in the cloud forest environment is tough, especially when combined with photography, like my dad and I do. Birds are in the open for a few seconds and then hop back into the foliage. So this is actually my dad's photo because I couldn't get a photo of this chestnut crown Ant-Pitta. And it's also pretty special to see an Ant-Pitta out in the open in the wild by itself, because in lots of lodges and lots, Ant-Pittas are fed to come out at will. So it was cool that we saw it out in the wild. On the first day, a lot of time was spent in the car, so we were quickly changing environments again, back into this dry deciduous forest, kind of like the Tumbes. And we do see a Tambesian Terrenulet, which is another recognized subspecies of the mouse-colored terrenulet. As the name suggests, this is found in the Tumbes area. This is the most we'll go into the Tumbes region, so I just wanted to show this as just to get species from every single type of region in Ecuador. And next thing we knew, we were back in the cloud forest again, welcomed by another classic species. So this might get a bit confusing, so I'll just have a map here to explain. We landed in Catamayo, drove down through Loja, and Loja is where we stopped to have lunch. And we were driving past here. This is where the dry Tumbes region was. And our destination was Reserva Tapichalaka, or otherwise known as Casa Simpson. So we were welcomed by a classic cloud forest species. It's unexpected because it's unexpected to see these so far west, but it was a good surprise. They're pretty rare, and it's a very pretty bird with a pure white cap and iridescent blue wings and throat. And iridescent feathers are not stuff you see very often in tanagers. So this is a special bird. An interesting fact about these is that they sometimes hang out with jays, and their calls mimic those of jays. So we reached Reserva Tapichalaka late in the afternoon, so there was not a lot of light, so we couldn't go birding. But my dad and I go birding during the off season because I have school and don't have the time to go during the main seasons. So we often go on night walks, and basically the entire lodge is reserved for us. So that night we saw a scissor-tailed nightjar, and this is one of the two nightjars in the Andes with really long tails. They're interesting birds seen right after dusk, and they look strange with their tails that are almost 3 times the size of them. We do see another type of nightjar later in the trip, a scissor-tailed nightjar later in northern Ecuador. So Reserva Tapichalaka is one of those areas that I said do feed Ant-Pittas so that they come out. So the next morning we went out to this area to look for a chestnut-naped Ant-Pitta, which is often seen on the lodge's property after a short walk. So And pittas are very territorial. So when there's food out, so the lodge gives them worms. When there's food out, they often attack each other. So right after this photo, two male um, two male chestnut crown amphitas started fighting, and they get really roughened up. And it's quite an interesting sight to see. Unfortunately, I have no photos of that. So this is what we would see the next morning as we went on our walk. It's Reserva Tapichalaka is known for the Hokutoko antpitta, another antpitta as the similar to the two ones that we've already seen. This is a typical landscape for cloud forests, and one can imagine like a mountain toucan or mountain tanager is just soaring through the air here. Along the trail, we see some more common species like chestnut-capped brushfinch and a yellow-breasted brushfinch. These two are New World sparrows, so the name finch is not particularly correct. But during the trip, I got very confused with these two, and because of their small differences in color. But they both have a red fiery crest, which makes them pretty interesting birds. And here's a mountain tanager. So like I said, there are a few mountain tanagers in Tapichalaka, cloud forest area. Unfortunately, this is the only mountain tanager we saw, but they're very pretty birds and have equally special calls. And continuing, we ended up seeing a white-throated quail dove. So there have been blinds set up along the trail in the small chance that this dove does come out. They're very hard to get a photo of, so the smallest noise will scare this bird away, which is why the blinds were needed. And as I said, the main goal of going to Tapichalaka was to see the Hokutoko antpitta, the bird that inspired one of the largest conservation efforts in Ecuador. When Robert originally discovered this bird, this antpitta, it actually made him tear up. He became so inspired that the Hokutoko Foundation was formed, and they've been creating reserves and areas, and it's one of the largest movements in Ecuador for conservation. So they do feed the Hokutoko antpitta, which is why it's so close. I use this photo to show how close the antpitta gets, and it makes for some pretty good photo opportunities. So this is the Hokutoko Foundation. Right now we are at Tapichalaka, #1, where the Hokutoko antpitta was found, and makes sense to be the first starting location. So over the years, they have been building more and more lodges and getting more money for reserves, and they're still continuing up to this day. Here's a pretty important species, the orange-banded flycatcher. It's a small tyrant flycatcher, and its restricted distribution is in the Andes in southern Ecuador and in the northernmost part of Peru. It's basically an endemic of Ecuador. Very little is known about these orange-banded flycatchers. Its population is suspected to be declining, and it's in a near threatened for conservation status. It's actually on the wanted list for photos of eBird in Ecuador, so I'm happy to have gotten this. So these orange-banded flycatchers are known as handsome flycatchers. I will talk more about this later, but they're just more colorful and more interesting looking flycatchers than other ones you'd see. So back at the lodge, there are some hummingbird feeders. As I said, there's gonna be a lot of these hummingbird species. Hummingbirds are found in the New World, and if you're familiar with Asian birds, they're similar to how sunbirds look and act. So at first glance, this hummingbird doesn't look too bad, right? But it catches its head, it turns its head, and the face just catches fire. The iridescent feathers shine. So this is actually not a photo from this trip, but it's the best example I have of this iridescence. And not only do these birds look exotic, their names are also exotic. So this one is named Ruby Topaz because of the colors on its head. No other bird family would have names as exotic as these. So they're named after precious metals, jewels, and basically fanciful names that anyone can come up with. So this one's a photo of a amethyst-throated sun angel, which is, again, amethyst, sun angel, and the bird like lives up to the expectation of the name. So here's another sun angel. I'm pretty sure if this was any bird family, orange-throated sun angel would have sufficed, but since they're hummingbirds, it has to be named flame-throated sun angel to go with the theme of the exotic name. So I think you guys are beginning to get the theme here. Next is a chestnut-breasted coronet. Again, coronet named after jewels. These coronets are the most aggressive hummingbird species and probably the most widespread in Ecuador. So you find them in northern Ecuador as well. So we only spent one night in Tapichalaka, and the next day we were on the road again to Copalinga Lodge, further south. So just like its birds, Ecuador is a pretty country and a very colorful country. So the only look of the interior we got was driving from reserve to reserve. So you have a few photos. So yeah, so we start at Tapichalaka, go back north to Loja, and end up at Copalinga and the National Park of Podocarpus, near the major city of Zamora. So Copalinga is situated on the Bambuscaro River, and this river runs through the valley. We were at a slightly lower elevation than Tapichalaka, so we're going to get a few more different species. I'm not sure why, but at Tapichalaka, we didn't see too many tanagers or honey creepers or anything at feeders, which was kind of sad. But I was glad to be welcomed by a green honey creeper, a very common feeder species at Copalinga. A new hummingbird species here, the gray-chinned hermit, was also spotted at feeders. It's not as colorful or shiny as the other ones I just showed, but it has a few interesting features, like its curved beak, which it uses to feed on heliconias. It hovers in the air for quite a while, which allows people to get pretty good flight shots. So as I said, you're going to be getting a few more different species. So for example, here's the gray tinamou. This species is along the lower east slopes and also in a large part of the lowland Amazon. Tinamous are mostly more heard than seen. They have a low whistling call. So it was exciting to see these species. They're pretty similar to pheasants, like neotropical pheasants. And here's another angle of it. So back to the feeder and the areas around the feeders. Orange belly euphonias, the male and the female, are pretty common at most feeders. They look similar to the thick-billed euphonia, which the only difference in color is that the thick-billed euphonia has a yellow head and a more yellow underbody compared to the orange of the orange belly euphonia. These two often confuse me during the trip. So at the feeders, there's many species of tanagers. Tanagers are one of the most characteristic families in the New World. This is a white-lined tanager. It's quite drab because it's a female, and also in general, white-lined tanagers aren't that colorful, but most tanagers are explosive with color and make for amazing shots. So we came to Podocarpus National Park for a few species such as the white-breasted parakeet and the Amazonian umbrella bird. Umbrella birds are cotingas, and cotingas are very showy birds with lots of ornate features. So if you know what the Amazonian umbrella bird looks like, you'll know that it has a crest on top of its head, and it's a large black bird. So when we were in Copalinga walking on the trail, we saw a large black object fly by. So we thought it had to be the umbrella bird. But since they're shy and birding in the field outside of feeders is difficult, we couldn't get another photo of it. But we'd be back to Copalinga another day to try again. And then the second target species in this area, the white-breasted parakeet, it's basically an endemic to Ecuador. There have only been a few sightings of it in Peru, northernmost Peru. Getting this photo itself was extremely annoying because we were hearing them calling all throughout the day as we were walking, and it took hours for us to find them. We had to walk through the foliage, and it was actually a dangerous photo opportunity because they were on the other side of a cliff that the Bambuskaro River had created. So my dad had to hold me back by my jacket while I took this photo. So it was a pretty scary experience, but I got a really good photo, so I'm happy with it. Back to the tanagers. Now we start getting some colorful tanagers like the green and gold tanager. All the colors are very striking of this. The blue stands out. The electric blue stands out against the black back. And then here's another angle of it from the side. And then another one is the golden tanager. And then this is one of those birds that I talked about that because of the Andes and the division, the elevation difference, there are different subspecies on the right slope and the west slope. So when we go to northern Ecuador on the western side, the golden tanagers are more yellow and have a smaller black patch on their cheek. And lastly, the blue-gray tanager is one of the most common seen at feeders and is found in feeders in many countries. It's a pretty common bird, but I love the sky blue color against the yellow leaves. Feeders aren't just tanagers and hummingbirds, of course. We sometimes get species you don't expect to see, like the speckled chachalaca. Here it is feeding its young. I'm not sure if that's just a leaf or if it's actually feeding. Chachalacas are like neo-tropical pheasants. They have a very dinosaur-like look. So it looks like a velociraptor from Jurassic Park. So no wonder people think that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And another one which you wouldn't expect to see is a sickled winged guan because they're very shy and stay deep in the forest. They're widespread in the Andes on both slopes. They're shy, as I said, so they don't come in close to the feeders, but they stay around on the edges, hoping to get some food. In fact, a monkey even came to one of the feeders and stole a banana, which shows like the diversity of all these countries. I don't have a photo of it, but I just wanted to point that out. Now here's another hummingbird. This was around the feeders feeding on this flower. This is a golden-tailed sapphire. It's a new hummingbird species, one that's named after a precious metal, and the back is like a rainbow color, which these hummingbirds do deserve their fancy names because they are fancy birds. And another one, the violet-fronted brilliant, displaying its purple crown. These brilliants are an extremely pretty group of hummingbirds, which I'll have more photos of later in different areas of Ecuador. And then another one, the fork-tailed wood nymph, has very similar colors to the brilliant I just showed, but its whole body is iridescent. And this is another pretty hummingbird. So the past 3 hummingbird species I showed you were all taken near feeders, but sometimes it's nice to see species that are not on feeders. So we found this wire-crested thorntail outside of Copalinga National Park on a bush of flowers. So as its name suggests, it has a wire crest and a thorntail. So taking photos of thorntails in flight is extremely difficult because they're quite small. These thorntails are smaller than the other 3 hummingbird species I just showed. So focusing on this bird in flight is difficult. So I'm sure a lot of you are photographers and you know the struggle of trying to get a photo of a flying hummingbird, except 90% of the photos are not in focus or just have the flower behind it. So that's what a lot of my time was spent that day doing. So I did manage to get one in flight, and this photo was in the top 100 for the Audubon Photography Contest of this year as well. And then we went back on the road and we were heading more south towards the Ecuador and Peru border. And we were entering a area of Amazonian lowlands. And my dad would like to speak a bit to the importance of the region.
Thanks. Vayun, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to briefly talk about this because we went here to see one of my main target birds, which was an orange-throated tanager. There's a little bit of story for it. So the orange-throated tanager was found in 1963 by John O'Neill, who's one of our most important ornithologists alive today, and he's responsible for a lot of discoveries in the neotropics. So as a graduate student in 1963, he discovered this tanager, which was the first new species found in like over 34 years. And it was so spectacular and so different that it got its own genus, Vetmorthropis. And actually, it opened the eyes of the ornithological world that there were still new species to be found. And since then, lots of species have been found, including in all over the world, including in India, for example, and of course, lots and lots in neotropics. So when I first heard about it, that was a species I wanted to go see. For the longest time, it was only found in a remote valley on the border of Ecuador and Peru. And after a while, that big area became somewhat inaccessible, and that there were problems with the locals there, etc. So it became out of reach. So just before this trip, I heard that the orange-throated tanager had started being seen in an area that was now more accessible by regular birders, which was right on the border with Peru in this area on the Rio Negriza Valley, and there's a new lodge there. So that's why we went there. And so this area is actually part of the Cordillera del Condor. So one quick note about that is when I was just started to bird in 1993, later in 97, I read this report about the rapid RAP, which was a rapid assessment protocol that Ted Parker, which is one of John O'Neill's students, and Al Gentry, who was a very famous botanist, they started this concept that if an area is under some sort of ecological threat, go there quickly with a team of like high-profile biologists and quickly do an assessment of that area. So they went to this region called the Cordillera del Condor, which is a ridge to the east of the Andes. And they went there and they found a lot of species, including the orange-throated tanager. So so that was another reason why I really wanted to go there. And so it was great that after many years, we got a chance to go there. That was part of the inspiration of this trip. Vayun actually wanted to see another species he will talk about. But for me, this was the main target. And there were some more interesting species here. And one of this is this foothill chiffornis, which is a new species. I actually had an exposure to this in northern Peru. I gave a talk in BABP a few years ago. But that day I fell in mud and I couldn't take a picture of the foothill chiffornis. So it was great to come back into its range, and Vayun managed to get a picture. And in fact, this is still one of the few decent pictures of the species that's around. And eBird uses this for its description of foothill chiffornis. And for me, what was especially proud was for a period of time, his picture was right next to Ted Parker's recording. So to see his name next to Ted Parker was quite a thrill. So that became kind of a bit of a bonus for us. We saw some special species during this trip, during this portion of the trip, besides the orange-throated tanager. So I just wanted to talk about that because I was so excited about this whole experience. Okay, Vayun.
All right. So the main reason for the rapid assessment protocol was to stop deforestation in important areas such as this. So there is a small reserve named Reserve Maiku where the orange-throated tanager is found. But everywhere outside of it, there's deforestation like this happening. And since it's a border, there's military there, so you often see trucks and bulldozers going through the road. So as we descended down into the Amazon lowlands, the first species we saw was a long-tailed tyrant. So they're all over the Amazon, reminding us that we were leaving the moderate temperate cloud forests and going into the hot and humid lowlands. As we continue, we began to see species that you'll only see in this part of Ecuador. So here's the black caracara, which looks like the turkey vultures that are common here. Both of them feed on dead carcasses, and to prevent diseases and to prevent from getting dirty, they don't have feathers on their face, exposing their red skin. So as we continue down our road, my dad asked for the car to be stopped, and he said that there was a bird on the street. I thought he was losing it because of the heat, but in fact, there was a tiny, tiny bat falcon. Although these are much smaller than any raptors you'll see, they still feed on birds and other small bats that it catches in flight. It's pretty widespread in southern and Central America and can be seen even as north as Mexico. So here's a closer up of it. One feature to this area that's important and special is the mountains that are formed in this area. They're almost like the Tepui Mountains found in Venezuela and Guyana. So they have a steep slope with a kind of plateau top. They're actually extremely interesting for research purposes because the species that you find at the top are different from the species that you find at the bottom. So it's fascinating to see how such a small difference can create two different biological islands. So yeah, the Tepuis are formed around the Nangarzita River, which is where Reserva Maiku is located on. Violaceous jays are related to the scrub and seller jays that we see here and are always seen flying or in treetops overhead in hot and humid areas such as these. They stay in flocks and their call is pretty obnoxious, so you'll always know when they're around. That night, we ended at Cabañas Yancuam off the river, the river Nangarzita. Although this is not a Hokutoko lodge, there are a few conservation efforts going around. So Naturaleza y Cultura is the foundation, I believe, that is funding this area and pushing for more reserves to be built. So this yellow line is the border of Ecuador and Peru. We ended the night here in Yancuam and went on road into Reserva Maiku, where the orange-throated tanager was seen. As you can see, it's just a very small amount of area that is preserved compared to all the area that could be preserved. Here's a black-faced antbird. Antbirds and antshrikes and ant rams are important species in the Amazonian fauna. They don't actually eat ants, as the name suggests, but they rather follow ants and eat things that would like to eat on these ants, such as scorpions. So they're extremely shy and found on the low level. So getting a well-composed, well-lit photo is a challenge. You have to be on your knees the entire time, and it's almost luck to see and get a good photo of an antbird. The same applies for flycatchers, which are tiny and stay high up in the sky. So after a day of looking for flycatchers and then looking at the bottom for antbirds, you'll probably end up with a case of warbler neck. So here's an example of one of those flycatchers. We saw a dozen species of flycatchers, but this is the one of the few that I have a good photo of because it was around eye level. The ornate flycatcher is one of these, quote, handsome flycatchers. It's related to the orange-banded flycatcher that I showed previously. And other types of birds in this family that you would see are pretty dull. But as the name suggests, ornate flycatcher has some pretty interesting colors. I put this in to show the difference between the handsome flycatchers and the other flycatchers you would see. So this is a slaty capped flycatcher. It's pretty drab and dull. You don't actually see it in the area that we were with, but I just showed it for comparison purposes. And a more lowland species, the trogons are in a family with quetzals, and they're seen in many countries in Central and Southern America. They both have wild colors and a distinctive eye ring. This specific greenback trogon is found all over the Amazon, and here it is feeding on something. They actually eat both bugs and fruit, so I'm not entirely sure what it's feeding on. And then here's another example of a flycatcher. This isn't a great photo, it's pretty blurry, But here, the flycatcher is actually acting like an ant bird. It was staying low to the ground and hopping around places. It was special to get a photo of this bird because of its rarity and difficulty. And it's barely just a few centimeters long, so it's hard to find it out in the jungle. So here's another photo of it. And now the main goal of coming this far south, as my dad said, was to find the orange-throated tanager. We spent most of the day with our eyes peeled onto the trees. This is the best shot I could get. Although it's not that great of a shot, I'm still extremely happy to be a part of the few people that have a photo of the orange-throated tanager. And at least you can see all the vibrant colors like the orange throat and the blue wing and the yellow belly. So my dad was extremely excited to see this photo, and here he is pointing with a thumbs up to the tree that we saw it on. Okay, and back to this map. Since there's a border, I said there's military, and it means that there's development, and just people coming by is inevitable. So there's this village of Shaime, which is being developed, and along this road, bulldozers and trucks are coming and going. So we actually do cross into Ecuador, but since it's quite a remote area, this border is pretty fuzzy. So here we are in the village of Shaime. We just stopped by to see like what the area was around and to see if we can get more species. This is this is the border. So this river flows along the border, and Peru, it's undisturbed forest, but Ecuador has all this development going on, which is sad to see, and it's slowly being constructed. Here's a white-banded swallow that we saw in Shaime. The river goes through the village. And another sad sight to see is gold mining along the river. They actually reportedly use mercury, which is illegal and pollutes the water. So the fish and the birds and the fish that birds eat, like that swallow was getting in for a catch, it's not very safe for them. So the next day ended up being quite an important day with lots of special photos. So as my dad said, this is the foothill chiffornis. It used to be considered a mannequin, specifically the thrush-like mannequin. It's not at all like any other mannequins. It's not colorful. It's just a dark brown. It doesn't have a fancy plumage. It doesn't have its own genus. And recently, it's been split into 5 separate species. So the ones in the lowland were the foothill chiffornis. They're all pretty unknown of, and the foothill chiffornis is the least known. And it's a pretty highly sought after bird for photographers. You like the tinamou, you'll often hear its call more than you'll see the bird itself. So all throughout that day, I was hearing and whistling the call, and it stuck with me. And because Ted Parker's recording is right next to my name, I've begun to memorize the call. So this is what it looks like when it's calling. It sounds something like, which is a very pretty call, and it's song-like, and it's probably the only relationship it has to mannequins. So the next major species is the spot-winged parallette. When I photographed it, our guy thought it was just the female of some other parrot because he's never seen it feed, and he's never seen it at this low of an elevation that we are. This is one of the first photos in Ecuador, and this is the only photo on eBird at the time where the entire bird was visible. It's again eating on the same thing that Trogon was, but these are also omnivores as well, so I'm not sure what it is eating. It could either be some type of fruit or some type of nut. So here's another close-up photo of it. And here's my guide. He was in like disbelief because he didn't think we'd see it here. And later that day we saw it again, which shocked him even more. but this is good because it means that the population is probably rising and they're coming down into areas to come and eat. So here we are on a boat doing a ride through the Tepui cliffs that were formed and the Nangarzita River. So one of my earliest experiences in birding are on lakes and rivers. This was in Tambopata in southern Peru, and the only transportation was on boats. So this was one of my first neotropical birding experiences. I was in 5th grade back then, and I decided to recreate the same experience in Ecuador with a better camera, of course. So when we got off the boat, we saw a mixed flock of tanagers and tanager-like birds. So Yankuam did not have any feeders, but we saw this mixed flock, and it's always nice to see species you would normally see at feeders, but out in the open. So this one is a white-bellied dacnus, and it was feeding on some berries. And here's a silver-beaked tanager, not a very pretty tanager. I added it just to show. And then after this, we headed back to Copalinga. So we had like a 2-day journey in Yankuam, but it was a very important journey, and we got pretty important species checked off. We were seeing hummingbirds from the moment we got back to the feeders. So this is a many-spotted hummingbird. It doesn't have the most exotic name, but I still want to show all the photos of decent hummingbirds I have to show the diversity of species inside the family. And then this one is a glittering throated emerald. These emeralds all are greenish bluish and have a red bill. And again, it has a pretty interesting name, the glittering throated emerald. Another classic neotropical species you see is the crested oripendula. If you've ever been to the neotropics, you'll probably heard, or at least you've probably seen or at least heard these species. Its call sounds like a water drop. So late into the afternoon, as when you're at the feeders, and all you hear are these water drops, they start to get pretty obnoxious. And another one of those families that I haven't talked about yet are barbettes. So this is the female of the red-headed barbette. The red-headed is just a red head with a green back. So I think the female is actually better looking than the male. And then later that day, we went back to Copalinga to look for the Amazonian umbrella bird and hopefully get a few more target species. So we ended up seeing the white-breasted parakeet again, but I was glad to see it because we get to see parakeets in their normal behavior. They're huddled up and preening amongst each other's, which you'll see a lot of parakeet species doing. I'm pretty sure all of you have seen photos of these parakeets just lined up on a branch, like dozens of them cleaning each other. We expected to see these parakeets at a clay lick. They feed on clay because they eat berries and fruits, which are very acidic. And the clay acts as a sort of antacid to help neutralize the citric acid in their stomach. And then, gladly, we did see the Amazonian umbrella bird, but this is the female. But nonetheless, my dad and I were very happy. So the female has a very short crest, but if you've seen the male, it has a crest that like loops all the way down to where its beak is, and it's a very interesting bird. So here's an orange-eared tanager. I've never seen this species before, never even at feeders. So like in Yankuam, it's nice to see tanagers out in the wild. This is in a mixed flock of other tanager species, like the golden and green and gold that we saw at feeders before. And here was also another one of our targets, the black-streaked puffbird. It's very restricted by its habitat. It's only on the eastern slope of the Andes, found in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. Not much are known about puffbirds because of their rarity and elusive behavior. And sometimes they camouflage well, not that well in this photo, but because of their dull color and they barely ever move, it's hard to see. Here's a golden-eared tanager. this is like a combination of the colors of the golden and the green and gold tanager. Again, a lot of these species are lifers, the first time I'm seeing them. So I'm excited about every single new species I get to get, even if it's at a feeder. And another hummingbird, another hermit, in fact. This is one of the larger hermits. I showed you the gray-chinned one just previously. And this one also has the curved build adapted for heliconias. And if you're wearing bright colors out in the rainforest and in the cloud forest, these hermits will come and buzz you, and they'll hover around you, which makes for good photo opportunities. And then lastly, the last thing we saw at Copalinga was the red crested finch. It's pretty uncommon to see these in Ecuador and in feeders itself. They're mostly found in southern Brazil, but it's a very pretty bird when the crest is up and puffed. So my dad had a target species of the orange-throated tanager. One of my target species was the newly discovered blue-throated hillstar. It was discovered in late of August of 2018. So by the time we went to see it in summer of 2019, not much was known about it other than the ridge that it lived on, Cerro de Arcos, which is around this area here. It's at 13,000 feet, so we have to climb a lot of elevation in just one day. Here, me and my dad on the road and a waterfall leaving Copaling. So as I said, it's a newly discovered bird, but this area around it has been developed a lot. So if you look at Google Maps, this area has no roads, and the old field guides call the southern Andes in Ecuador one of the greenest areas in the world. But as can seen, almost every square foot of this area is being used for farming, and none of the native vegetation lasts. So we have to keep climbing higher and higher just to see this hillstar. So as we climbed in elevation, the outlook wasn't looking too good. It began to rain, and since our guide had only been there once and our driver had never been there, we were getting lost. We had to ask the locals for directions often, and I had to translate from Spanish because my dad was getting worried that we were going to get lost and have to spend the night in the car. But eventually, we did make it to Cerro de Arcos. It was raining extremely hard, but now we were on the final leg of the journey. And we made it above the clouds, and this was like with the sunset looking out into the Pacific coast. It was a extremely pretty scenery. So the type of vegetation you get here is called paramo. It's native vegetation to the crest of the Andes. So it has these puya plants and orange chuquiragua flowers. The hillstar, it gets very cold at night, below freezing. So what the hillstar does is it goes into a state of like semi-hibernation or deep sleep around in the afternoon and wakes up late in the morning, and it hides inside these plants to stay warm. When we got there, there was cabins, and we learned that these cabins have been here for a year or two already. So they weren't built because of the hillstar. The hillstar was actually discovered because someone had come here on vacation and found the hillstar. But this was extremely high elevation. It was very cold. We had to keep a fire going all night. And the next morning, I woke up with a pretty bad headache because of the altitude, and also the outlook wasn't looking too good. It was looking like the previous afternoon. So we decided to just go out and try to see the hillstar because we have the entire day here, so why not? So we went out by car, and further down, it was raining. So our car got lodged in the mud. We had to walk all the way back up to the cabins, and by the time we were back, our umbrellas were a little more than just scraps of plastic and metal. While we waited for the weather to settle a little bit, We saw a few species like the chestnut-winged cinclodes. It's a pretty boring-looking bird, but there are a few hummingbirds actually that you'll find at this elevation, like the shining sunbeam. It also looks like a dull brown bird, but its name comes from the rainbow patch it has between its wings on its back. I don't have a photo of this, unfortunately, but there are more hummingbirds here, such as the female of the great sapphire wing, and this one is much more colorful. And it's also, I believe, the second largest hummingbird in Ecuador. So it's cool to see hummingbirds at this altitude, in addition to the Hillstar. By noon, the weather had improved a little bit, and this time we went out on foot through the Paramo to look for the Hillstar. These Chuquiragua flowers are orange flowers that are on the tops of these plants, and it's the only source of nectar for these hummingbirds. So we were scanning the tops of these, looking for the Hillstar. We eventually did see the Hillstar, and with this photo, I was like satisfied for the entire trip. We spent so long coming here and waiting to see the Hillstar. Just a record shot of a newly discovered species was, well, like a dream come true. But we waited and waited, and the opportunities just kept getting better. Here you can see the iridescent blue and green head, and just as we were about to leave, the Hillstar came up right in front of my face, no more than 5 feet away, and I got like the shot. So this photo is perfectly composed. You have the orange flowers, the rain in the background, and this photo just made the trip perfect for me. It was actually sitting on these flowers itself, so my camera was not zoomed in at all, and I was very happy to get an experience like that I'll always remember. Unfortunately, landscape on Cerro de Arcos and a lot of these areas in the Andes are being converted to pine plantations, and the Paramo and Chuquiragua flowers are going away. So a study was done recently, and it concluded that only 400 individuals of the Hillstar are left. So after learning about this and taking the photo, I looked for ways to raise money and awareness. So I did a fundraiser with my photo and ended up raising a few $100s and donated it to Hokutoko, which ended up making this a reserve. Although it's quite a small area, hopefully this will allow for more awareness and more people going, and the population can rebound. So then we descended down into the western slope. So if you think about it, we were on the eastern slope, we went up to the crest of the Andes, and then now down to the western slope into the Choco region, one of the wettest in the world. So this was in the afternoon, and it's so humid that there's clouds even near sunset. So with the same as Yankuam and in southern Ecuador, there's a lot of deforestation and development. When looking at images of Buenaventura on Google Maps, I was like, this is like finally a really big reserve, but it's actually just restricted to a few mountaintops of greenery, such as here and here. But sadly, there is deforestation, but on the good side, there are plenty of species here and species that are making a rebound in population, such as the El Oro parakeet and long-walled umbrella bird. So we started seeing lots of flocks of toucans as we descended down. This is the yellow-throated toucan, and it has a western subspecies called a chestnut mandibled toucan. We also had the chance to see a choco toucan, which is exclusive to the Choco region, but it's pretty rare in Buenaventura. So we started seeing more hummingbirds and arasaris. Arasaris are just smaller toucans. Here's the pale mandible toucan. It has an interesting pattern on the chest, and it came to feeders quite often. Another feeder species, the orange-bellied euphonia that we saw earlier in Copalinga. It's pretty common, so I won't talk about it too much. And then we're back to hummingbirds. So this one is a green thorntail. So it looks very similar to the wire-crested thorntail, except it doesn't have that crest on the top, but it still has the tail and the iridescent green face. And here's the female of it. These thorntails are so small that they aren't even bending the leaves that they're sitting on. So there's quite a lot of diversity that you can see in Ecuador, from the sapphire wing, the second largest hummingbird in Ecuador, all the way down to these small ones that weigh almost nothing. So one of our targets was the black and white owl. So we heard it calling at night, and since I don't have a tripod to shoot photos with, I always go handheld. So whenever I can get an owl shot or a nightjar shot, I'm always happy with it. My expectations are low, but luckily I did get this pretty nice photo with black and white bands. And another target was the long-walled umbrella bird. And this was my dad's main target in Buenaventura, because if he saw this one, he would have seen all the umbrella birds in the world. This one is like the Amazonian umbrella bird with its crest, except it has this long wattled, which is a feature of cotingas. They're extremely showy. Surprisingly, it was high up on a stump, which is unnatural for its behavior. You'd expect to see it in the thick foliage, but we'd come back to hopefully see it again. Some more rainforest species. Here's the garter trogon. Again, it has a distinctive eye ring, and I like these garter trogons a lot because the black and white banded tail always seems interesting. And along with exotic naming conventions for hummingbirds, you also have some pretty basic ones just describing how the bird looks. So like it's the brown bird with the violet ear. So it's just called the brown violet ear. Pretty simple. But again, there's also hummingbirds with exotic names, such as the green-crowned brilliant. I said that we'd see these brilliants more. Brilliants have a distinctive iridescent purple, and they're found a lot at these feeders. Here's the female of it. Females of hummingbirds are also quite interesting, unlike a lot of other species in the world. And another type of hummingbirds you'll see at feeders a lot are Jacobins. Jacobins are extremely active, and they make for great photo opportunities, such as this one, and this one with its wings spread. And it's also it's common, but it's also a pretty good bird, which is always nice to see. And Buenaventura is in the El Oro province, and the El Oro province is the only one in Ecuador with the El Oro parakeet. It's a extremely endangered bird. I think Buenaventura is the only reserve that protects these El Oro parakeets. The Choco side of Ecuador is actually like known for not having that many reserves. A lot of the area is being deforested right now. So it only has around 120 individuals. But I'll talk more about the El Oro parakeet in a bit. On the path up to where we would see these parakeets, we were seeing mixed flocks. So we actually saw this manakin in a mixed flock of tanagers, which is pretty uncommon. Manakins are probably my favorite type of birds. I hope one day to see the araripe and helmeted manakin in Brazil. I like them so much because they have their they are flashy, and then they also have their unique wing snaps and displays, which I've never seen before. So I also hope to see that. And then we're beginning to see other parrots, like this bronze-winged parrot. It's a Choco species. It's a very colorful bird, except because of the conditions and lighting, I couldn't really get that great of a photo. But it has a blue body and a red tail on the underside. So what I was saying about Choco being deforested a lot is this mountain that we were on was protected by Buenaventura, but immediately the next mountain over is being used for plantations, as seen up here, and cattle grazing it. So here's me pointing to where we would see the El Oro parakeet up on this tree. It's very far away, so I couldn't get that much of a detailed photo of an individual, but you can see the basic behavior of parakeets again. They're huddled up, and the name comes from the El Oro province that they're in. This is, I said before that this is the sole protected site of these parakeets in the world, and Buenaventura Reserve is, fortunately, they're making nest boxes to hopefully help rebound this population. And here they are again, more preening feathers. As we descended from the El Oro parakeet area, we saw this gray backtalk. This is one of the few raptors we saw on this trip. I especially like this photo because of the composition created by the branches and the framing it makes, and also how the white stands out against the black. So in the Choco region, we began to see different hummingbirds. So the hummingbirds we see here are a taste of the hummingbirds we'd get up north. This is an introduction to what we would see later in our journey. So this one here is the green-crowned brilliant. Again, the brilliants have this purple throat. And this is the violet-tailed sylph male. Violet-tailed sylph female. The male has a large violet turquoise iridescent color. So in the rainforest, we also saw poison dart frogs and red squirrels, which are a classic accompaniment to rainforest birding in these wet regions. And later that day, we went back to look for the long-wattled umbrella bird. We saw it much lower down and in perfect light. My dad and I were thrilled because we managed to see it during its display. So what these umbrella birds do is they have this wattle, and for their mating display, they puff it up and have this large, low bellowing sound. I tried to get a video of it to show you guys, but I couldn't, but it's a sight you have to see. So either go to Buenaventura or look up a video on YouTube, but it's an extremely interesting and unique experience. So to wrap up our time in southern Ecuador, we have one more small hummingbird. Here's a violet-bellied hummingbird, extremely iridescent and light as well. And that concludes the southern portion of our trip. We went to Quito and Mindo for a day because I learned about mountain toucans and the type of flash photography they were doing there. So that was a day more of photography and less of looking for new species and targeted species. So, on the plain north, we saw these Cotopaxi and Antisana volcanoes. Cotopaxi is the highest volcano and mountain in Ecuador. The Andes are a part of the Ring of Fire. So it's a mountain and volcano range formed between the tectonic plates. And this is what you'll see if you fly throughout the Andes. So when we landed in Quito, we went to a lot of lots which are known for photography. Mindo in the Quito area in northern Peru, it's known for photography. So there's all types of feeders to attract birds. Before, we were getting fruit and nectar feeders for hummingbirds and tanagers. Here there were feeders where they shine a light at a white sheet at night, and then they hope for moths to come and sit on the sheet. And then in the morning, they reveal the sheet, and these species come out to see them, which you would otherwise have a hard time seeing out in the wild. This is a gray-breasted wood wren and a streak-capped tree hunter, which is near impossible to see. But because of the moths, we got to get photos of these. And the russet-crowned warbler. So as I said before, the main purpose of going to northern Ecuador was to see the plate-billed mountain toucan. It has wild colors, and I'm pretty sure if you gave me a box of crayons when I was 5, I would have drawn something like this. Like a toucan shouldn't have a blue a bright sky blue belly, but it does. And when it turns, shows side profile, it reveals even more colors. So there's 3 mountain toucans in Ecuador, and unfortunately we missed the other 2, the gray-breasted and black-billed mountain toucans down in southern Ecuador in Tapichalaka area. But the plate-billed is actually the most colorful, so I'm glad that we at least saw this one. So everyone in the north is friendly for photography, and when we went to the north, I decided to experiment with stop flash photography. So what we would do is we would set up flashes around a flower and wait for a hummingbird to come and just click, and all the flashes would illuminate, lighting up the entire bird. So here's what the results of flash photography look like. Here's another brilliant, the Empress Brilliant, which is probably my favorite hummingbird in Ecuador. It has a scissor tail, entirely green iridescent body, and again, the characteristic purple throat of brilliance. And here's a violet-tailed sylph. We saw the female in southern Ecuador, but the male is just so much more colorful, and we had to go see it. And here's one with the whole tail visible. The tail is like the size of the main body of the bird. Again, some more variation. This is the speckled hummingbird, female collared hummingbird, female collared Inca, which you see a lot in Peru, which where its name Inca comes from. And then the buff-tailed coronet. So as I said before, coronets are pretty dominant, and the main hummingbird there, they're aggressive. And while we were taking these flash photography shots, whenever a different hummingbird would come, the coronets would always come to try to scare it away so that it would get the nectar. So here's another one on a different flower. And while I was experimenting with doing flash photography, my dad was doing non-flash photography. So he's also getting the same species, but he saw more than just hummingbirds. You're seeing masked flower piercers and glossy flower piercers. These birds have a curved hook bill, which they use to pierce flowers, as the name suggests. He had some action shots with 2 birds interacting, another violet-tailed sylph, and he also got some more species, like the fawn-breasted brilliant on the left and the long-tailed sylph. So I think he was getting more and better photos than I was, but I enjoyed the experience of flash photography, and we'll probably try to do it again someday. So back to my photos now. We changed locations, going to another area for photography. I stopped doing flash photography. I was now just doing handheld camera and no flash. So this is a collared Inca. And an example of how much the hummingbirds have adapted to humans because of photography in northern Ecuador is here. As I was like exchanging flashes and setting up flowers, they would all just run to me and sit on my head and hands. So here's a purple-throated woodstar, a female. The woodstars are extremely tiny. I think this one is 2 to 3 inches in length. And there's the rufous-tailed hummingbird. As you change locations, you will see different types of hummingbirds. And then this is one of my also favorite species of hummingbirds, the booted rackettail. This is one of those hummingbirds whose name is just a description. It has boots along the feet and a racket tail. Like there's nothing really else you can call a bird as fancy as this. And as I said before, the golden tanager is an important species. The golden tanagers are different subspecies compared to the ones in Copalinga. If you remember what that photo looked like, it was more orange and the black patch was larger on its cheek. This one is more yellow and has a smaller patch. The changes in elevation and the Andes create this distinction between subspecies. And this crimson rumped toucanet is the 4th type of toucan that we see. We get the typical toucans, like the large toucans in the Choco area, the Arasaris, we saw at feeders, the mountain toucans we just went over, and now these green toucanettes. So there's a lot of diversity all across Ecuador, which is the common theme of the talk here. And then here's another hummingbird whose name is just a description of the bird. It's a purple bibbed white tip. So you have the bib here and the white tip here. And this is one of my dad's favorite combination of photos because he finds the naming and the two sides of the bird just so interesting. There's a sparkling violet ear. It's like the brown violet ear we saw, but more iridescent and colorful. And a velvet purple coronet. This doesn't look like the other coronets you saw. The other coronets you saw were more yellow and green and had a coppery color. But coronets are pretty common. And this velvet purple one actually has a purple crown, which you can kind of see. But since the light wasn't striking it right, I have no photos of it actually shining. And then we went back on the road to go to some more places for photography. And along the road, we saw this Pacific Hornero. It's a fernerid or type of ovenbird you see. In Spanish, hornero means oven, and the family of ovenbirds are known because of the are named because of the nests they make. So they make these nests out of mud and sticks that look just like ovens, like you could use a pizza oven for reference. It'll look like that, much smaller with a small opening, which is why these birds are called ovenbirds. They're not as pretty as hummingbirds and toucans, but they're just as interesting in their behavior. And then the second mountain tanager we saw is this blue-winged mountain tanager. The other one we saw was the lacrimose down in Tapichalaka. Sadly, we didn't see more tanagers than these, but they're extremely pretty birds, and the mountain tanagers are probably my favorite type of tanagers. Here's a flame-faced tanager. These are species that you see only in the north, and you wouldn't really see the species down in south. Here's a red-headed barbet. I showed the female before, and I said that the female had more interesting colors. This one has bold colors, but I find it to be less interesting than the female, which had blue and orange and yellow bands across. I also wanted to show this photo in conjunction with the toucan barbet, which is the fifth and last type of toucan we'd see in the strip. It has characteristics of a barbet, like this one with a sharp, stubby bill, but how the head is turned back and the colors remind me of a toucan. So it's a combination of the both, and its scientific name reflects this. The scientific name is also a combination of barbet, the barbet genus and the toucan genus as well. So as I said before, we see another nightjar here. We actually see the lyre-tailed nightjar. They're rock color, they're brown and speckled. So I don't know if you guys have found it yet, but it's camouflaged and it's sitting right down here in this corner. So this is what it looks like. These lyre-tailed nightjars, you can't see the tail in this photo, but it has a tail as long as the scissor-tailed nightjar, which is around 2 to 3 sides of their body length. And here it is with a youth, a juvenile nightjar in the back. So this day was mainly meant for photos, and we went to Angel Paz's lot, which I think a few of you know, where many people go to take photos of the ant pittas, where Angel Paz started this idea of feeding ant pittas worms so that they come regularly and make for good photo opportunities. We didn't actually sign up for any of these photography sessions and ended up going on our own time, but we saw some species that I don't think we would have seen if we had gone on a photography trip. So we saw a golden-headed quetzal. It's one of the 2 quetzals in the Mindo area, and they're in the same family as the Strogans. And finally, last but not least, we have the blood red subspecies of the Andean cock of the rock. It's a must-see if you ever travel to the Andes. And with that, I would like to say thank you and open the floor to a few questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Vayun. So if any of you have questions, you can use the chat system. So I'll give everyone a moment or two. But in the meantime, yeah, thank you so much, Vayun. That was an excellent presentation. And congratulations on finding some of those rare birds. And thank you also, Vivek, Vayun's father, for helping out, using some of his photos and arranging this expedition. Okay.
Okay, so the first one is.
Okay, you can take over, Vayun, if you see.
Oh, okay. So the first one's asking how long I was in Ecuador. We were there for 10 days, but we were traveling a lot, so we mainly only birded in the mornings from like 6 to 2 on most days. But 10 days, 8 in the south, and then 1 day was traveling to the north, and then 1 day in the north. Photography equipment. So I use a Canon 70 Mark II and a Canon Mark II 100-400 zoom lens, f5.6, not one of the lower f-stop lenses. Life list count, I would have to say, I think close to 700 now. A lot of the species I saw like earlier in my life were repetitions of ones I'd seen before. But now as I'm beginning to travel more and to more like diverse areas, I hope to go to Africa soon and India for birding. But I'll go whenever this coronavirus ends. So hopefully that's soon, because I need to make a new calendar to show my photos.
Vayun, did you want to mention your calendars?
Oh yeah, so I use my calendars for fundraisers, and this year I would like to sell my calendars to a larger group of people. So if you would like, I could drop my email in the chat below, and if you would like to purchase a calendar, and I'll send all of the profits to Hokutoko or local conservations. So after selling my calendars,
And
so at
Vayun,
the end, I could drop my email there.
Yeah, Vayun, if you could just give me the information, how to get the calendar, and I could post that to our group's mailing list.
All right, that works as well.
And Vayun, did you want to mention your the award you got from Audubon?
Okay, yeah, I actually have the photo with me, so I could share the photo again. Share my screen. So here was the photo that won in this year's Audubon Photography Contest in the youth category. This is of a northern jacana down in Belize. I really like this photo. It's looking into a lily, and although you can't see its eyes or like a lot of the head, it's like it was pretty. It was a pretty nice photo and special. So this photo was taken when I was in 7th grade, I believe.
Huh.
But I've never submitted to any photography contests other than local ones. So I just wanted to get my photos out there, and luckily I won. So.
Okay, Vayun, we have another question.
Okay. So when did I start photography, and how young was I? So when I first started photography, it was in the Everglades in Florida. We'd gone to Florida for my sister's birthday. I was 7 at the time. So we were like, it was really hot, and we were in this Anhinga trail. And my dad was like, gave me one of his old cameras because I was like looking pretty tired and wanted something to do. So that's just when I started photography. So one of my first photos is of a great blue heron with a fish. And since then I've been doing photography, and this I hope to give more talks in the future.